The hospital ring over Asteria Roman foreshuddered as warning buoys lit like a string of sunrise. 15 hostile signatures cresting the horizon, straight toward a city of refugees who had nothing but paper ID and the hope somebody would keep a promise. Captain Lena Ortiz stared at the threat vector and said the sort of human thing that gets written on walls later. We don't start hunts, we end them. In the next 9 minutes she would wager her flagship, a pocket full of illegal math, and the credibility of Earth's first oath to the stars. Part 1. They called it the Triarch Beacon, a cathedral of glass and graviton struts where the Concord of 9 welcomed juvenile species with silk chains. For 2 centuries, the procedure never changed. A shuttle with 20 bright-eyed explorers docked, signed a 5-century probation, and shuffled home with a starter kit of safe tools and heavy taxes. Today, the sensors reported a primitive FTL wake inbound to the beacon's lane, so the Concorde lit ceremonial hulls and warmed the translators. The wake broke wrong. Not needle-thin like a scout, but broad and layered like surf. First out came the UEN Axiom, a slab-sided human arc with a spine gun sheathed, its hull painted in blunt whites and hazard yellows as if daring the galaxy to read it wrong. Then 20 escorts unfolded like origami, rescue cruisers, carrier tenders, and 3 unmarked ships that refused to reflect on any spectrum. The Axiom moved not like a brawler but like a tugboat that had hauled cities. "Identify," said Archmediator Seals in the beacon's amphitheater, her crest stiff with annoyance. "State intention. This is Captain Lena Ortiz, United Earth Navy, transmitting credentials in Concorde Standard and Trade Cant, requesting humanitarian corridors to Ward 27 and Ward 31. Her voice was calm, weary, and absolutely certain, like a medic asking for a clamp in the middle of chaos. Ward 27, Ward 31. Polite names for indenture lattices the Concorde filed under non-intervention zones. Ortiz let the silence hang, then added, "We've monitored your broadcasts for 3 months. We understand your laws. We understand your loopholes." The chamber rippled. New species were supposed to arrive raw, dazzled, starving for membership, not with legal briefs and fleet logistics. Concorde protocol, polished by millennia, had no drawer for this. "Juvenile species lack standing," Seals replied, drawing authority around her like a robe. "Probation ensures stability. We will assign you a mentor block." Ortiz didn't blink. "Stability without justice is embalming. We're not here for embalming." She laid out a list in dry, prosecutorial cadence: auction houses on the Velix Rim, domestic service credits traded like grain, security contractors laundering private wars through Concorde contracts. The words were unadorned, the evidence packets were uglier. "We'll shut them down with or without your escorts. We prefer with." Aid screens flashed urgent glyphs. Patrol captains were already pinging the Axiom's hull with reconnaissance probes and finding nothing useful. The ship drank signals and returned polite static. It was infuriating, like arguing with a stone that had passed the bar exam. Seals shifted tactics. "If you act unilaterally, we quarantine Earth, trade locks, gate denials. You will fade in your cradle." "Ma'am," Ortiz said, "our cradle taught us the logistics of the Montgomery bus boycott and the airlift into Berlin. You can lock a gate. You can't lock a supply chain run by people who know how to move hope." Someone on the Concorde dais flinched as if struck by a history they didn't share. The communique that ended the meeting wasn't a declaration so much as a schedule. 48 hours to establish humanitarian corridors into Ward 27, 72 to certify closures of forced labor sites, neutral observers welcome. It was arrogant if you read it as a demand. It was necessary if you read it as triage. The Concorde chose pride. They voted a pacification wing into being, 30 warships with ornate prows and real guns to intercept the Earth convoy before it reached the wards. Admiral Threx of the Jund Collective took command, armored in a century of stale peacetimes and the faith that massed formation still meant something. On the Axiom, Ortiz watched the fleet assignments scroll out of Concorde space and exhaled through her teeth. "They're bringing a phalanx to a code war," she murmured. Commander Nikhil Dihar, her operations chief, traced vectors in the air. 30 hulls still means 30 chances to kill us by accident. "We won't give them the chance," Ortiz said. "Spin up the Lamini, seed the corridor, and get me Ochoa." Lieutenant Ochoa arrived with a rucksack of illegal math and a grin that made admirals nervous. "You want the whisper net or the dust ballet, Cap?" "Both," Ortiz said. "We'll speak softly first." The countdown began. The oath went out on open channels. No bombardment, no first strike, no civilian harm. The Axiom put its bulk between the wards and the Concorde's pride and waited for a century of doctrine to arrive at speed. When it did, Ortiz would either rewrite the first contact script or become a footnote under juvenile hubris. The pacification wing knifed out of FTL like a flung mirror. Threx hailed with the confidence of old empires. He found a human captain who smiled without warmth and promised to show him the future. Then she cut the channel and said, "Begin." The first pulses left the Axiom too gentle to notice. That was the point. And on the beacon, SEALs realized, 5 seconds too late, that Earth hadn't come to beg, they had come to keep an oath. Admiral Threx trusted mass and precedent. 30 hulls in a crescent, fighters fanning like feathers, 1,000 missiles arranged to saturate. It worked on raiders. It worked on descent. It had not been tested against a species that taught children to program drones before they drove cars. The Axiom's Lamini unfolded, petal-thin wafers the size of dinner plates, 100,000 of them, exhaled into a three-dimensional lace. Each tile was dumb alone. Together they were a chorus line of physics, refracting, delaying, and whispering on bands the Concorde didn't even bother to name. The WhisperNet. Ochoa called it because it spoke in the margins where sensors thought only silence lived. Missiles lit, confident. The net breathed, less a shield than a rumor. Ranges fuzzed, friend-foe tags drifted, time itself wobbled by microseconds. Fire control computers, raised on certainty, reached for firm ground and found soap. The Axiom didn't jam, it invited the enemy's math to slip. Threx barked new orders, close to knife range. Fighters in. If the sky lies, put steel in its face. It was the right instinct for a different century. "Dust ballet," Ortiz said, and the Axiom sneezed a cloud of smart grains into the battle space. Microspheres with polarized skins, shifting patterns faster than a blink. They painted false wakes and phantom thermal blooms, sketched ghost hulls just far enough off true to waste fire. Back on Earth, naval cadets studied Midway and learned that a minute of misread vectors could tip a war. Here, Ochoa sold the fleet 10 minutes of curated doubt. The first Concorde salvo died young, intercepted by human point defense that never raised its voice. Rail cannons chattered like fast rain. Laser nodes stitched neat, surgical lines no wider than a hair. Liaison crews on the rescue ships called out impacts on empty coordinates. Nothing there, nothing there, nothing there, until their voices got quiet with something like awe. Non-lethal only, Ortiz reminded, because commands repeat when hearts pound. Target power couplings, radiator spines, turret rings. If you can break it without spilling anyone into vacuum, do it. Stealth cutters ghosted in on the wing's flanks, not invisible so much as uninteresting. They kissed hulls with packets that read like firmware updates to Concorde systems long overdue for a patch. That wasn't hacking, it was maintenance impolitely performed. Turrets froze, then politely parked. Hangar doors cycled and refused to reopen, but the atmosphere stayed. Someone aboard a Jund cruiser whooped when life support persisted. They had expected death. They got embarrassment. Threx found his flagship's main battery inert. "Cowards," he spat, because humiliation searches for moral vocabulary and finds none. He ordered kinetic rams. "We will touch them." The navigators tried, genuinely tried, to put steel on Earth's hull. The WhisperNet smiled and smudged a decimal. The rams missed by meters that felt like miles. Orthodoxy said this couldn't be happening. 30 ships, not a single human casualty, not even a scratch worth reporting. But Orthodoxy hadn't watched code talkers confuse machines and men in the Pacific, nor read how London's fire wardens rerouted water through streets that maps didn't understand. War is logistics of reality. Earth's sin and virtue was to be very good at logistics. Open channel, Ortiz said. Fleet wide. She didn't gloat. She laid out terms like stepping stones over a flood. Stand down, observe the corridors, help if you want, or clear the lane and watch. She offered co-credit on the operation. She offered to fix the firmware back afterward. She offered dignity, which is rarer in war than mercy. Threx chose withdrawal because he could count and because his crew stared at him like mutineers do before they know they are. We will report, he said, ragged. This isn't over. No, Ortiz agreed, voice low, it's starting. The wing limped away without funerals. The Axiom didn't chase. Whirring around her, the Lamini settled like a flock coming to roost. Ochoa's hands shook now that the music had stopped. Cap, she said softly, we just taught them how old they are. Ortiz didn't smile. Now we have to be the thing we pretended to be on the call. Dihar pinged her a new feed, Ward 27 inner perimeters, latticework of guard towers and barcode gates. The workers inside had stopped pretending not to watch. Somewhere a child lifted a pan lid like a shield and peeked at the sky. Begin corridors, Ortiz ordered. Record everything, and someone call the cooks. If we're rewriting law, we'll need soup. They burned the first daylight of Asteria Roman 4 on paperwork and bolt cutters. They found ledgers older than some stars and smashed them with scanners and signatures. When a guard asked, truly puzzled, who gives you the right? A human doctor answered, the same person who gives you yours, and pointed at the first patient on a stretcher. By dusk, the auctions were quiet. By night, the first convoy rolled, and far off the Concorde drafted sanctions and speeches, because power hates a vacuum and loves its mirrors. On the Axiom, Ortiz stared at the next map. They'll come hard, Dihar said. They'll come clever, Ortiz corrected. Hard is easy to plan for. The alert ping sounded before the coffee went cold. 15 signatures inbound fast, not Concorde, something meaner, less polite, the kind of ships that painted their prows with debts. Dust away, Ortiz said, and stood up to meet the ones who didn't recognize oaths at all. They were Dravari privateers on paper, which meant they were murderers with invoices. Their captains had lost fortunes when Ward 27 froze its auctions, and somebody had told them the refugee hospital was soft fruit. They came in close to the planet's Terminator line, riding shadow like a superstition. The Axiom was already between the ring and the sun. All ships, safe harbor protocol, Ortiz called. That meant defensive weapons free, lethal fire last. It also meant civilians first. Shuttle lanes cleared, power buffers stacked, spillover beds inflated in cargo bays. War feels different when your triage officer writes the rules of engagement. The privateers opened with everything because greed confuses volume with inevitability. The first salvo complicated the ring's weather but broke nowhere useful. Human point defense sang, less a roar than a metronome. Target their teeth, Dihar said, and cutters feathered out, surgical teams with torches, snipping the weapon mount nerves from hull muscle. Ortiz thought about Dunkirk and how a nation once turned fishing boats into a navy because the math of survival demanded humility. Launch the little ones, she said, and a cloud of courier pods boiled from the Axiom's belly, EMT bots with shielding plates and bad attitudes. They planted themselves along the ring's scarred ribs, absorbed what they could, and hollered status like excited interns. Inside the hospital, a Kel child stared through a viewport at a human marine in soft armor kneeling to tie a splint on someone with tentacles. Are they soldiers? The child asked. They are what we send when things matter, the interpreter said, and wished every language had a shorter word for that. The Dravari tried to flank. Ghost cutters, already there, turned flanks into fronts. Ochoa, who had slept an hour out of the last 24, clicked a window open and whispered to the dust. The ballet resumed, less grand now, more mean. A muzzle nudged 3 degrees off. A fuse believed it had burned longer than it had. A pilot swore the stars had moved because they had from her point of view. "Disable if you can," Ortiz kept saying, and her gunners kept finding ways to make that true. A boarding team cut into a privateer hull and found crews half-trained and terrified, hired hands on the wrong side of an argument they barely understood. The Marines zip-tied wrists and then handed out water. It was politically unsatisfying. It was strategically devastating. Mercy ruins recruitment. 5 minutes in, the privateers had 0 operational batteries and 3 ships tumbling with attitude control sulking. "Stand down," Ortiz broadcast. "You will be boarded, you will be treated, you will be tried." Somewhere in the center of that sentence lay a civilization's thesis statement. They surrendered in chunks, a turret here, a captain there. One hothead tried to go nuclear out of spite. Ochoa caught the telltale, swore, and spiked the sequence with a gust of math so precise it should have been illegal in peacetime. The weapon took a nap. The hothead cried. After the ring kept humming, the bots reported fewer fires than expected. The triage officer exhaled a prayer that sounded like a checklist. Ortiz sat down for the first time in hours and felt how much a human spine can weigh. Her comms pinged, arch-mediator seals, eyes darker than before. "This display..." "Protection," Ortiz said. "Displays are for parades." Seals hesitated. 7-member species petitioned to observe your coalition talks. 3 demand censure. 1 demands your extradition. "We cook for observers," Ortiz said. "Censure can have coffee. Extradition can wait in the hall." She cut the line because 15 new requests for aid blinked into existence like constellations. Asteria Roman 4 was not unique, it was precedent. Success turns into summons. Dihar rubbed his temples. "We can't be everywhere." "No," Ortiz said, "but we can make everywhere easier." Her finger tapped the draft she'd been writing between crises, the Charter of Free Harbors, mutual defense, humanitarian rules, voluntary accession, exit rights. No slavery, no genocide, no aggressive wars, no exceptions hiding behind pretty words. The core was simple enough to teach to a child and hard enough to terrify a committee. "Publish it," she told legal. "Plain language, big fonts, ask for signatures, not secrets." The first to sign were not great powers. They were city-states with good ports, station keepers who knew what it meant to keep the lights on, clans that had learned kindness as a survival tactic. A chorus of small voices. Ortiz felt something settle in her chest that wasn't pride and wasn't relief. It might have been belonging. The alert chimed again, a different timbre. Dihar's face tightened. "Saboteur ping, inside the ring, badge cloned, power bus 32. Ortiz was moving before he finished. Boarding teams pivot to internal. Marines, soft posture unless you see blood. She snagged a rifle she hoped not to use. The ring's corridor smelled like antiseptic and fear. Somewhere a pump stuttered. "Captain," Ochoa said in her ear, suddenly very awake. "I think they're going for the neonatal bay." "Then we run," Ortiz said and did, because some oaths are measured in seconds and the only strategy is to be fast enough to keep them. He wore a Tex orange and the wrong shoes. Ortiz saw the heel pattern before she saw the bomb. A compact geometry clipped along a power spine like a lamprey. The saboteur looked up and saw a human with command on her collar and an expression like a closed book. "Don't," she said, gentle as a nurse, rifle down at low ready. "You don't want the history that comes with that." He hissed something about debts and bosses and promises of amnesty. None of it mattered in the narrow arithmetic of a NICU 6 doors down. "Listen," Ortiz said. "You walk away and you get tried with everyone else. You push it and 20 incubators go dark and I don't care what the Concorde calls me next." Her voice never rose. Authority doesn't have to shout when it is decided. He twitched toward the clip. The Marine behind Ortiz put him on the floor with a move older than gunpowder. Ochoa's bypass code cut the device's appetite, and a medic peeled it off like a bad bandage. Somebody laughed hysterically, the sound you make when probability swerves. They found 2 more packages, sloppier. They found a liaison's badge in a stairwell trash can. They found a grief they didn't have time to feel. They filed it. They got back to work. On a platform overlooking the neonatal bay, Ortiz recorded a transmission. No anthem, no flag, just a woman in a wrinkled uniform and a room full of tiny machines breathing for younger lungs. To anyone listening, she said, "Safe harbor means you can dock without paying a bribe and leave without wearing a chain. It means medical oxygen counts as sacred and kids aren't bargaining chips. We'll defend that with law where we can and steal where we must. If you want in, sign the charter. If you don't, at least don't shoot at hospitals." It wasn't poetry, but the view count spiked anyway. Somewhere a dockmaster in the Velix Rim printed the charter and taped it above a coffee urn. Somewhere a Concord Junior, smart enough to see the hole in her own institution's heart, forwarded the clip to a private group titled, "Maybe Better." Admiral Threx's official report hit public channels that evening, so carefully worded it squeaked. He called Earth reckless and competent in the same breath, promised reforms, and asked for budget lines his superiors would deny. Ortiz listened, then turned the volume down and opened the request queue. 4 more wards, 2 famine stations, a cluster of miners trapped under a contract that called itself eternal. "Cap," Dihar said softly, "we need a council of our own." "Not a throne," Ortiz said, "a table." The first agenda wrote itself: logistics, tribunal standards, patrol rotations, recipes that feed 5 species without starting an allergy riot. The second agenda was uglier: what to do when a signatory broke the rules. Stoicism says the obstacle is the way. Governance says the exception is the test. They closed the day by opening the doors. The Axiom's hangar deck turned into a cafeteria of argument and laughter. A Jund engineer traded filter designs with a human quartermaster. A Kel grandmother scolded a Marine for tracking oil on clean tiles and then handed him a sweet bun. Someone tuned a stringed instrument. The ring hummed like a ship that remembered it was a city. The Concorde's reply arrived as a block of sanctions dressed in law. Gate denials, trade freezes, seizure of contraband lamini, a threat to impound the Axiom if it crossed certain lines painted on a map by hands that had never changed a filter. Ortiz read it like weather. "We don't break blockades with cannon," she said to her staff. "We break them with neighbors." Messages flew, station by station, port by port. Little places with small pride and big memories of being ignored agreed to look the other way at the right moments. The map changed without moving. "Broadcast the oath of free harbors," Ortiz told comms. "Then get some sleep." They sent it in 12 languages and 3 kinds of math. It said what it needed to say: "We don't sell beings. We don't burn fields. We don't bomb hospitals. We don't make exceptions for friends. Sign and be defended. Break it and be alone." When Ortiz finally sat, Asteria Roman 4 sunset threw copper across her boots. She thought of code talkers relaying words no machine could parse, of the long line from trench medics to the nurse who now checked an incubator's seal. War stories usually end at the explosion. The good ones end at the oath. "Tomorrow," Dihar said, setting down a cup that tasted like coffee only if you believed, "they'll come smarter." "Good," Ortiz said, "so will we." The deck vibrated with the soft purr of generators carrying a city of strangers into morning. Out beyond the ring, new signatures blinked alive: observers, petitioners, jackals, judges. The galaxy was arriving for the argument Earth had started. Ortiz looked at the map and smiled without showing teeth. The next move belonged to those who thought power was a chair. She had brought a table, and seats enough for anyone ready to swear the oath. The first session of the table looked nothing like power. No thrones, only folding benches bolted to the Axiom's hangar deck, spill mats over scuffed plating, a projector riding a cargo crate. Delegates wore whatever their worlds considered good clothes: heat-sheened robes, patched duty jackets, beadwork that meant more than medals. A cook insisted on ladling soup into any hand not already holding a tablet. It smelled like cumin and apology. Ortiz opened with the Charter of Free Harbors in a voice that belonged in a classroom: simple clauses, hard promises. "We are not a government," she said. "We are a promise machine. You sign, we keep it. When you break it, we don't make excuses. We fix it or we leave. A Kel delegate asked the obvious knife of a question. What if fixing means striking a dockyard that keeps arming slavers? His scars were new, his patience older than the room. Then we remember proportionality, Ortiz said. Just war isn't a slogan, it's a measurement. Force to stop force no farther. Midway was won by timing, not slaughter. Dunkirk by humility, not shells. If we forget that, we turn into the thing we came to stop. The hangar lights flickered as the sanctions bit. Concord Gate authorities had started random inspections that lasted exactly as long as refrigerated cargo tolerated. Asteria Roman 4 ring ran like a city that had learned to hold its breath. Dihar slid a data block under Ortiz's hand. Projected calorie counts, oxygen budgets, burn rates measured in hours. We need a sky bridge, he murmured. We need it yesterday. Berlin taught Earth how to feed a city by air when rails, roads, and reason failed. The Axiom's comms spun a lattice of schedules and favors, a choreography of small ships that turned distance into habit. Stationers on the Velix rim offered spare holds. A retired tug captain volunteered his crew for the stories. A Jund engineer designed breakaway pallets so landings could be sloppy and still safe. Concord's inquest office responded with legality dipped in acid. They issued a protective seizure order against the Axiom and any craft carrying destabilizing material. Seals's signature sat at the bottom, neat and tired. Ortiz stared at it until the page blurred. She thinks this keeps us from a shooting war, Dihar said. She's trying to fence with paperwork. Paper can bruise, Ortiz said, but we've been bruised before. On the ring, a nurse taught a Marine how to swaddle a baby with 4 arms. Down the corridor, Ochoa and a choir of teenagers from 5 species rehearsed words no machine translator liked. A mesh of Dene, Casa clicks, and a merchant cant from the swarm belt. Human history called them code talkers, voices that ran faster than enemy math. Here, the kids called themselves dispatch. They moved pallets with phrases the inquest's filters didn't recognize as routes. The sky bridge launched at dusk. No fanfare, just a cadence of little ships bumping through anti-boarding foam and needle inspections. The Axiom didn't lead. It loitered like an old shepherd while courier craft disappeared into sanctioned lanes with holds full of antibiotics and lentils. A Concorde inspector waved one through, bored. He didn't notice the crate-marked filter mesh was also carrying prepaid legal counsel forms in 6 languages. Logistics is a form of love with a ledger attached. Hard contact in 2 hours, Dihar said, pointing at a cluster of signatures the sanctions had hatched. A lawful intercept task group, 3 grappler barges, 2 shield sleds, and an escort whose paint still smelled new. The group commander flashed warrants and polite menace. Ortiz brought her bridge crew in close. Rules don't change. We show them what restraint looks like. We don't make martyrs out of customs officers. You could end this with one burst. A Kel guard whispered, watching the escorts loom. You could teach them fear. We're trying to teach them duty, Ortiz said. It's slower. The intercept group laid foam webs like spun sugar and announced a non-violent immobilization. The first courier scraped a web and shuddered, lights brown out. 2 EMT bots kicked loose, drilled ports through the foam, and fed battery packs through like nurses sneaking snacks past a dietitian. The couriers kept going, slower, stubborn. A grappler barge latched onto a human tug and began reeling like a fisherman who thinks he's snagged the sea. The tug's pilot toggled the breakaway fittings Ochoa's team had welded at 0300. The barge reeled in half a hull's worth of sacrificial shell and a handwritten note that reads sorry about the paint. The pilot limped onward and flipped the barge a cheer that translated to buy you a drink later, maybe. The escorts finally threw a legal escalator, board or be impounded. Ortiz answered by opening her hangar to neutral observers and live feeds, every camera hot, every mic honest. If you board, you do it on public record, she said. You'll find only what we declared. You'll also find a cafeteria. You're welcome to eat. The escorts hesitated, not from fear, but from the horror of being seen doing a hard job badly. Seals pinged from the edge of the grid, a shadow in the sanction machine she had signed and now seemed to regret. "Captain Ortiz," she said, eyes like tired stone, "present yourself for inquiry. If you don't, Threx will come with chains you won't cut." "Invite him to the table," Ortiz said. "Give him soup." "I can give you a corridor," Seals whispered and pushed a gate window across the map like a blessing she wasn't allowed to say aloud. Dihar caught it and routed the next 10 flights through. The bridge cheered like it was a goal scored by a team built of pragmatists. Ochoa lifted both hands from her console and flexed cramped fingers. "Cap, hate to cloud the mood, but the inquest just filed an arrest writ for you personally." "Old Earth had a phrase," Ortiz said. "Serve me." Her comms chimed again, this time with Admiral Threx's gruff baritone and the click of procedural guns being oiled. "Captain Lena Ortiz," he said, and the title sounded like both respect and indictment. "Submit to custody under inquest seal, or I will take your ship." Ortiz looked at her crew at the hangar's table at the ring that hummed like a heartbeat. "Bridge," she said, "record. Then, Admiral, if this ends with force, let the record show it's because we refuse to abandon a hospital." She stood. "I'm coming to meet you." The channel clicked closed. Dihar's knuckles whitened. "This is a trap." "Maybe," Ortiz said and cinched her collar. "But tables don't set themselves." They met aboard a Concorde arc that felt like a courthouse had married a cathedral. Polished gradients of light rolled over columns that had seen a millennium of decisions, few of them brave. Threx waited in dress armor that remembered wars he didn't fight. Seals stood half a step back, eyes flicking between duty and doubt. "Inquest recognizes jurisdiction," a robed functionary intoned, tapping a staff as old as somebody's grandmother. "Captain Ortiz, you are charged with unlawful intervention, interference with commerce, and conspiracy to undermine recognized authority. Also feeding children," Ortiz said. "You missed that one." Seals winced. Threx's jaw tightened. "Captain," he said with the patience of a man who had been humiliated once and would not allow a second, "if you keep this tone, I can't help you." "You can help by helping," Ortiz replied. "We have corridors that need guards, not grapplers. We have slavers who need courts that convict, not committees that sigh." The hearing unfurled like a net, procedural questions, exhibits, a parade of witnesses. The Kell grandmother whose grief had turned into a ledger of names. A Jund engineer whose notes made everyone in the room feel like children. A Concorde inspector who admitted on record that the foam webs had unintended medical consequences. The transcript would be a master class in how systems learn slowly under pressure. Between testimonies, Ortiz remembered the Navajo Marines whose unbroken code shortened a Pacific War. "When machines hear everything, speak like home," she said softly to Ochoa over a secure line. Dispatch relays clicked and sang, and the sky bridge continued to move. The functionary cleared his throat. "The inquest proposes a protectorate protocol, Concorde oversight of your corridors, standard probation reduced to 1 century, approved technology lists." "Chains with velvet," Ortiz said. "No sale. We want co-equal tribunals, open audits, signatories with exit rights, and a humanitarian directorate that doesn't answer to revenue." Threx bristled. "You are asking us to abandon structure." "I'm asking you to remember why you built it," Ortiz said. "Structure that forgets justice collapses when someone knocks. We knocked." A bailiff hurried in with a tablet and an expression like spilled ink. The functionary read, blanched, and turned the screen. Asteria's hospital ring, smoke roping from a midsection like a cut artery. "Explosion NICU level," he said. "Casualties unknown." The room tilted, breath left bodies that didn't need oxygen. Ortiz's voice was steady because when the ground moves, someone needs to stand still. "We secured that deck. Our Marines were." Threx overlaid footage. A stealth silhouette, human wedge design, ghosted along a service spine minutes before the blast. "Your oath," he said, the words like salt, "is starting to taste like a lie." Ochoa's whisper stabbed Ortiz's ear. Cap, that's our cutter's shape, but not our heat. Someone puppeted a skin. I need time. We don't have it, Ortiz said, eyes on Threx. Admiral, give me 1 hour. Lock us in your hangar if you must. Let me prove what you already suspect. What I suspect, Threx growled, is that cleverness has made you cruel. Seals touched his sleeve. Admiral, she asked for an hour. 45 minutes, he said, and if you lie, I bring the chains I promised. Back on the Axiom, Ochoa tore through logs like a surgeon through gauze. The dust ballet's control channels had burped at precisely the wrong moment, not like a glitch, like parody. Ledger Shadow, she muttered, dredging a rumor from slaver boards and Concord procurement gossip. An off-books program that bought blind spots from censors and sold them back as alibis. I need the Inquest Arcs Auxiliary Corps. That's where the stitch is live. Admiral Threx, Ortiz said, reappearing in his holospace like someone who refuses to knock. My tech needs to audit your ship. The audacity, he began. The alternative is you arrest me, we resist. Your hearing turns into a memorial, Ortiz said. Just war starts with restraint. Help me prove ours. Seals moved first. Escort them, she told the bailiffs, and if they find what they claim, we will read it aloud. They crossed into the Ark's belly in a parade of suspicion. Ochoa palmed into the auxiliary bay and whistled low. Nice racks, she said to a bank of servers that purred like expensive cats. She threaded a bypass like a hymn and fed the output to a projector. The room filled with ghosts, time stamps shaved and reordered, thermal signatures composited like theater, a cutter's silhouette traced from publicly available brochures. Ledger Shadow wasn't a hack. It was a marketplace where truth was rented until the invoice came due. Vendor tags? Threx demanded. Ochoa zoomed until a watermark bloomed, a Dravari cartel seal wrapped in procurement codes that mapped to 3 Concord offices and 1 politician's niece. The room went quiet in the way rooms do when everyone is calculating how much of their dignity they can save. Seals closed her eyes. When she opened them, they were knives. Project this to the chamber, she said. Live. The functionary sputtered. You cannot. I can, she said, and I will. The feed hit the hearing like cold water. Delegates flinched as their signatures appeared in workflows next to phrases like plausible deniability. Ortiz didn't cheer. She watched the hospital's casualty updates tick from unknown to stable, from chaos to counts she could live with. The NICU had held. The saboteurs had failed at the only thing that mattered. Threx looked at Ortiz the way a soldier looks at an equal he didn't want. You get your hour, he said. What you do with the next ones decides whether I remain your enemy. Then don't waste them, Ortiz replied. Sit at the table. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. Outside, Concord patrols began peeling off from the foam webs, embarrassed by their own paperwork. Inside, the functionary put down his staff and asked for soup. And at the edge of sensors, a fleet blinked into existence, neither Concord nor cartel. A cluster of small banners and 1 big promise, the first Free Harbor's convoy under its own flag, arriving early and loud. Captain, Dihar said, voice thin with something like joy, we have company. Then we have a coalition, Ortiz said. Let's see if it can keep its oaths. The convoy's lead ship was a mining barge reborn as a banner, its name painted in 6 alphabets and 1 pattern of light. Table of Asteria. It came with escorts that weren't pretty but were earnest. Kell cutters with new armor plates scuffed by pride. Jund ferries whose captains had learned formation flying on the way over, 2 Concord patrol boats gone off duty, with crews who had new definitions of the word. Free Harbors convened in the Axiom's mess because no one trusted rooms with echoes yet. The agenda was brutal and honest. Tribunal procedures, salvage rules, patrol rotations, who would feed whom when crops failed, and what to do when a signatory broke the oath. The last item tasted like metal. A swarm belt merchant, antennae banded in orange for mourning, stood to confess. My cousin's boat took a Dravari paymaster last night. They didn't hurt him. They traded him for hostages. She looked at the floor. I signed your charter this morning. I will hand my cousin over to your court this afternoon. A silence deepened, respectful and terrifying. Accountability feels like amputation until you realize what you're cutting saves the patient. Ortiz nodded once. Bring him. We'll give him counsel and mercy and consequences. Seals watched from the doorway, uninvited and unescorted, a choice that made the Marines twitch. You're building legitimacy out of lentils, she murmured to Ortiz, a thread of wonder in it. If this works, we become the ones who have to explain ourselves. Competition makes saints of clerks, Ortiz said, or at least makes them read their mission statements. Threx arrived late, in armor less shiny and with a posture that looked like a decision halfway made. He placed a data wand on the table like an offering. My patrols found 2 more ledger shadow nodes. He said, I don't run from rot, I cut it. Then sit, Ortiz said, pulling out a bench. Soup. They ate while they argued an ancient human trick. Between spoonfuls, they wrote the bones of a joint tribunal statute, Concord judges paired with free harbor arbiters, victims' counsel with real teeth, sentences that aimed at repair more than ruin. They debated proportionality in paragraphs that would later be taught in places with fresher paint. Someone quoted Marcus Aurelius without making it pretentious. Someone else told a story about a dock strike that ended with a wedding. And then the room shattered. An alert. Ward 31 broadcast distress. A convoy wearing Free Harbor's transponders had attacked a Concord relief ship. Footage, legit this time, showed missile trails and panicked calls and a hull going dim. The assailants' signatures matched a Kell militia that had argued loudly for stronger measures and left the meeting early. The relief ship skipper died at his post, calling instructions that kept his crew breathing. The room's temperature dropped. Oaths are bracelets until someone breaks one, then they become tourniquets. Ortiz felt the hurt like a bruise blooming. We authorized no strike, she said, but the distinction would read like hair-splitting to the families who would bury a sailor. Threx didn't reach for his cuffs, he reached for his comms. I can take them, he said. Say the word. No, Ortiz said, we take our own. She keyed a line to the Kell cutters. Stand down, she said. Return to the axiom, bring your commanding officer in irons or resign your banner. Silence, then a voice that shook with anger and grief. You failed us for years, the militia leader said, meaning the galaxy, meaning anyone not them. We won't wait for your clean hands to get dirty. Ortiz kept hers open. Clean hands carry better, stand down. They didn't. They burned for dark space, proud and doomed. Threx's jaw hardened. This is our test, Ortiz finished. If we can't police our own, we're a gang with better fonts. Ochoa's feed chimed. Cap Rumor Net says the militia got their targeting packages from Ledger Shadow brokers. Someone is trying to turn our oath into a cudgel. She paused. I can ghost their guidance without cooking their cores. Do it, Ortiz said, and launch search and rescue. If they pop, we still pull them out. The militia's missiles died mid-flight with a whimper and a polite error code. Their drives coughed. Their pride didn't. They spun out of the lane, disabled, not dead, and human tugs pushed them home like drunks carried by friends who would scold later. The joint tribunal convened within the day because delay makes cynics. The militia leader stood before 2 benches, one Concord, one Free Harbors. He spoke of dead cousins and slow justice, and the way rage can masquerade as duty. The Kell grandmother from the soup line testified about vows that taste like iron when you chew them. The verdict was repair, hard labor building clinics under the eyes of those they endangered, exile from command, a return only after years of work that made the oath more than a patch on a sleeve. Threx signed the order. Seals announced it on Concord channels with a voice that had learned to pronounce contrition. Inside the chamber, someone began to believe in a table. Then the map erupted. A slaver fleet, larger and meaner than any yet. Blinking in from 3 vectors, the Dravari had consolidated, hired mercenaries with better lawyers, and purchased politicians who preferred quiet to courage. They sent a single transmission to everyone at once. Auction resumes, it read, Harbors burn. Ortiz set her cup down. All ships, she said, safe harbor posture alpha, civilians under us, escorts in wedges, dust at will. Threx drew himself up. Concord Defense stands with free harbors, he said. If anyone asks why, I'll say we were late to a good idea. Record that, Ortiz told comms. Ochoa lifted her hands, palms flat over the console. Cap, she said, voice thin with exhilaration and dread. This one's not a demonstration, this one's a fight. Then let's give them what they came for, Ortiz said. Restraint, precision, and the kind of memory that changes how they teach history. The slavers lit their drives, the sky lowered, somewhere in the ring. A child pressed a pan lid to a viewport again, believing correctly that rituals matter. They came heavy, 28 hulls with honest guns, carriers that vomited drones like seeds, a brace of hired cruisers wearing off-world livery that pretended neutrality. Ledger Shadow tried to lay its alibis early, thick as smog. Ochoa burned it away with a cleaner written on the back of a napkin during the hearing. No more rented truth, she said, and the dust ballet brightened into something like sunrise. Free harbors took the middle like a spine, Concord slotted left without being asked. The first pass wasn't a pass at all, it was a weave. Human cutters swept close and plucked teeth from maws, coolant lines, turret rings, anything you could break without spilling blood. Concord frigates executed a textbook crossfire that textbooks had forgotten, the kind that choose engines without touching crew quarters. Kell ships absorbed hits that would have crushed them last week and spat them into lamina nets that flexed and held. The slavers expected chaos as courage. They found choreography as mercy. Point defenses wrote calligraphy in hard light. Tugs body-checked drones away from hospital windows. Marines boarded precisely and left behind medkits and subpoenas in equal measure. In the court of public opinion, a place with more screens than seats, the live feed looked like competence with boundaries. It is rare, and people recognized it when they saw it. Mid-battle, Ledger Shadow played its last card. A false distress tagged to a Concord nursery station far out on the flank. "Help us," it cried, "we're burning." Ortiz looked at the telemetry, too clean, too neat. Just war theory has a clause about perfidy. She whispered, "Not this time," and Ochoa sent a decoy that fooled the foolers, a mirror held up to a mirror until both grew bored. Threx took a hit across his bow and laughed, a short, surprised sound. "It's been 700 years, he said on an open channel, "since I had to be brave." "Welcome back," Ortiz replied. They broke the slaver cruisers like stubborn puzzle boxes, hinge by hinge, catch by catch. When one captain panicked and tried to ram, a Concord sled absorbed the blow with a sacrificial hull and a curse that ended in a prayer. When another lit a self-destruct, Ochoa's illegal math tucked it into a pocket of quiet until bomb disposal could sing it to sleep. Not one hospital window spidered. The auction didn't resume. It evacuated. Boarding teams found bound beings and ledger stones, and in a captain's safe, a letter from a Concord politician promising favorable rulings in exchange for donations disguised as heritage preservation. SEALs read it on the channel, each syllable a nail. The politician resigned before the second page. The inquest staffer who had held the stamp that made Ledger Shadow respectable asked for a chair at the table and a chance to spend the rest of a career cleaning floors he had dirtied. When the last slaver drive guttered, Ortiz didn't call victory. She called triage, then audits, then a day off for the dust ballet pilots who had taught their fingers to be philosophers. The ring lights warmed. The NICU hummed. A Kell grandmother installed herself at the tribunal intake desk and told every new arrival the same thing. "Oaths are heavy. Help me carry them." Concord's council convened with fewer seats filled but more eyes open. They abolished the 5-century probation by a margin that would have been unthinkable a season earlier. They created a humanitarian directorate that reported to citizens, not purse strings. They wrote in language short enough to memorize that hospitals were sacred, that auctions of persons were crimes, and that any member who broke those rules would face a bench where victims sat in the front row. Threx walked onto the axiom without escorts and set his helmet down on the table. "Not surrender," he said when Ortiz arched an eyebrow. "Custom. Where I'm from, you share what saved you. Seals came too, shoulders lighter by ounces the room could feel. I thought order was the point, she admitted. Turns out justice is, and order is what you get when you don't look away from that. The Free Harbor's charter grew signatures the way a tide creeps up a beach, quietly, relentlessly. Small ports first, then stations that liked their independence but loved being useful more. Even a few big worlds sent observers who said nothing and took notes with hungry eyes. Competition works, Dihar murmured, watching two dock masters argue about whose checklist was kinder and faster. Ortiz stood where she could see the ring and the harbor and the corner where soup still steamed. We earned today, she said. We'll have to re-earn it tomorrow. What if you run out of tomorrows? Threx asked, not unkindly. Then someone else carries the oath, she said. Ideas don't need sleep. The galaxy didn't turn into a utopia. It turned into work. Patrols and hearings, crop failures and power grid hiccups, contraband laminae repurposed into school roofs, a dozen small crises a day and a big one every month. The Free Harbor's tribunal acquitted a captain once and ate the shame together until they figured out why the case had gone wrong. Concord auditors learned how to count without moving goalposts. Ochoa wrote a white paper that was half math, half ethics, and all warning. Any machine that rents truth should be considered contraband. They held the first Free Harbor's assembly under a banner that had been a barge, Table of Asteria. There were no anthems, there was a roll call and a vow spoken in 12 languages and 3 kinds of math. It said, we don't stand above, we stand between. We don't aim to be loved, we aim to be needed. We don't worship power, we saddle it. After, Ortiz took her first full night's sleep since the beacon. She dreamed of a long hallway with doors held open by people she'd never meet. In the morning, dispatch tapped her shoulder. Captain, the kid said, cheeks inked with a pattern that meant ready. A ping just came in from beyond the swarm belt. They say they have a plague and a war and a winter. Ortiz finished her coffee. Plot it, she said. Send the charter, ask what they need, not what we can give. Threx sighed the sigh of a man who had traded boredom for belonging. I was hoping for a quiet week. Quiet is for monuments, Ortiz said and smiled. We're building harbors. The axiom turned, a bright shape against a teal world, laminae stacked like folded wings. Around her, Free Harbor's ships settled into a convoy that looked more like a neighborhood than a fleet. Concord escorts slid into the curve with an ease that would make historians reach for new metaphors. Somewhere below, a baby slept through the burn. They came not in peace, but for it. They left not as rulers, not as supplicants, but as carriers of a heavy, ordinary thing, an oath hammered straight, held high, and shared until it felt less like a weight and more like a way to walk.